Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another one of our virtual third Wednesday programs. My name is Miranda. I'm the educator here at Rome Historical Society. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in, supporting us, and a big thank you and shout out to our corporate members, Mohawk Valley Community College, AIS, and Revere Copper. We really appreciate all the community support that we get from Rome community. If you haven't already, you can check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/Rome Historical, for more information on our upcoming programs. And you can view our past programs there as well. And if you go to romehistoricalsociety.org, you can become a member or donate to the society. So if you have a chance, go over to those places and check it out. Today, we're joined with Peter Leonard, and he's here with us today. We're going to be talking about the history of the Rome Fire Department. So it's really an honor to have you here. And thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great. So you have quite an extensive collection of memorabilia from the fire department that was started by your father?
Yes.
And he was also Pete, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So without further ado, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we can get started with your presentation.
Okay, I'll try to keep this lighthearted and easygoing for everyone. If you hear what sounds like someone dying in the background, that's our cat. For some reason, it's a warm day and he really wants to go outside, so I can't help that he's screaming over here. And every now and then, Lincoln's train goes by our house. So if you hear a train, that's... So other than that, I apologize up front. So yes, I've been a passionate collector of Rome stuff. No stranger to the Rome Historic Society. I know I gave you guys a big list of photos to look for. So this will be pretty much a graphic intensive presentation. I'm one of those people that feel a picture's worth a million words. So why waste your time? I'll just show you what we have going on here. So my dad was Pete Leonard was a City of Rome fireman for almost 30 years. I guess I got the collecting bug from him. When he passed away, I kept the collection, and anyone who knows my obsessive Rome collecting habits, that fire collection pretty much tripled in size. And I'm always on the lookout for that type of stuff, anything from Rome. I do have to say, though, before we begin, firemen fight. Politically, I could get away with this, I guess, because Rome hasn't actually had a lady firefighter. Huh. So if I screw up and don't say firefighter and say fireman, I guess I'm technically right on that. But, not for lack of trying, I guess. But so I've never known anyone other than my father and his friends, people that actually love their job, like love their job. And that's why I think the collection means so much to me, because I know these men put their whole heart and soul into this job. And like anything else, we're collectors. We do this stuff to pass it on for future generations. We try to preserve what we can, and that's the goal of the Historic Society, preserve what we can and pass it on. So I guess if we want to start the presentation slides, we can.
Yes, I can start.
So there's a picture of my dad. On the day of his retirement, I went and photographed him, took a couple pictures. That was one of his favorite photos in life. And I actually like it because that just sums him up, always ready to go, always ready to help someone. Next slide. So what is a fire? It's something that's hot. So as we see on the next slide here, fire requires three things. It requires fuel, heat, and oxygen. If you deprive it of any one of those three things, you don't have fire. So that's the job of a firefighter. Okay, I oversimplified that. So who actually started the fire departments in America? Do you know? Do you know? Ben Franklin was actually the first fireman, started the first volunteer fire company in America. And you can see a portrait of him on the next slide. No, wait a minute. Okay, well, how do you put out a fire? With an extinguisher. My bad. So I must not be looking at my own presentation. The first Rome Fire Department was formed in 6 AD under Caesar Augustus. A few decades later, in the 64, I believe it was, there was a huge fire in the city of Rome. And it's on the next slide. Yes, that was a bad night for the city of Rome. Oh, wait, Rome, New York. I'm sorry. I blew my own joke there. I'm sorry.
Oh, boy.
So yes, on the next slide, I believe Ben Franklin should be, no, okay. Yes, yes. This is how I do all my presentations. Don't worry, I come off in
great so far.
a comedic way.
Here he is.
So yes, he formed one of the first fire companies. So before there were firefighters, there were something known as fire wardens. Cities and townships would hire these people to basically walk about town during the nighttime. As you could imagine, all houses were mostly made of wood back then. The only source of heat you had was some type of fireplace or some type of incendiary outlet to heat your house. Things would spark off, buildings would start on fire, and that's when a lot of catastrophic fires would begin, would be during the nighttime. So the purpose of the wardens were to actually look for fire. If they saw a fire, they would sound off bells, whistles, whatever they had, which would wake up other people, which would start the firefighting process. Paul Revere, who was no stranger to nighttime rides, was actually a fire warden in Boston. All right, this is one of my favorite questions when we do this presentation. What were the 3 most important tools that a firefighter carried with them? Most people will tell you a hose, a fire truck, this and that. The most important tool was what they called a J-wrench, or a bed key. Now you're thinking, what is that? I've never heard of that. Back in the 17th, 18th, early 19th century, the most valuable object in a person's house was their bed. So it was the purpose of the firemen to get into the house, disassemble the bed, and get that out. So most of the early mattress frames were set up with a series of ropes that were under tension. This wrench would relieve the tension. They'd be able to collapse the bed and take it out. So if you've ever heard the expression sleep tight, that's what that's in reference to. These wrenches would basically set the tension for the bed that you were sleeping on. In addition to that, they would carry a leather bucket, which was to carry water. They'd have their bed key, and they would carry bags with them. So their purpose was not to actually fight the fire back then. It was to literally save the family jewels. It was to get in there and save your property. Because at that point, technology was so low tech, they really had no options to put the fire out. Next slide. So the early years of Rome. So I guess if we want to talk about Rome's first fire, we'd have to go to Fort Bull. So one night in 1756, the French laid basically a surprise attack on Fort Bull, which is in the modern day Erie Canal Village. The battle that ensued created a fire. Fire spread to the powder magazine. Powder magazine exploded and leveled the fort. I mean, that's the most brief history I could give you of the Battle of Fort Bull. Trust me, I'm sure Art would do a much better job on that than me telling you. So we'll leave it at that. If you want to call that the first major fire in Rome, that would be it. So then you have Fort Stanwix. After all of its revolutionary exploits, it fell victim to fire as well. So with that, the city of Rome was built on top of Fort Stanwix. Lynchville. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there. We've been studying, trying to figure out when and where Rome actually came about. I have a letter written by Dominic Lynch to his son James in 1798 where he actually called it Rome. So, I mean, that defies the Lynchville thing. But so basically, Dominic Lynch pointed in one direction and said, this will be Dominic Street, pivoted 90 degrees, said this will be James Street, and the city of Rome was built on top of that. Although we did not benefit from the original Erie Canal, imagine that, if the original Erie Canal went through, we would be Utica. So that means we would have better pastry shops? I don't know, no. So at some point, I mean, everything grew along the canal. The second canal that was dug went through the city of Rome, and that added a lot of business. A lot of people began to move here. And as you can imagine, factories sprang up along the canal, and the population of Rome started to explode. Again, that's just the map of 1802, I believe it is, showing that there were actually a few people who wanted to live in the wilderness and give it a go. So the village of Rome in 1819, this is where we pretty much say the fire department started. We're not really sure. The problem with Rome, from a historian's aspect, is that we can't really ever find anything documented before a certain period. Number one, there were newspapers of the time, but until somebody finds that hidden cache of Columbian patriotic gazettes that tells Rome's history before 1830, a lot of this is just speculation. So in the world of the fire department, they believe there was a small company that was formed called Company Number 1, which eventually became Independent Hose Company Number 1. We don't really know how many people there were. It was speculated to be between 20 and 40 people. And that was our original rudimentary fire department. Not really any equipment, just a group of men that were there to volunteer. Again, that expanded around 1825. We've been told through oral tradition, where they added on a couple additional companies. And so there were about 300 to 400 volunteers in Rome at that time. And again, the rudimentary machinery that was out there was so expensive at that time, that wasn't really an option in Rome and for most little towns. So this is a historical society photo. This is probably one of the earliest fire apparatus in the city of Rome. They're known as what they call fire tubs. So prior to this, I should back up a little. The only way they fought fires back then was with something called the Bucket Brigade. So everybody who owned a house kept several buckets in it. The purpose of that, when a fire started, they would start lining up from a water source, from a river, a canal, if there was a cistern in the center of town, whatever it was, they would form two lines. And basically they would draft the water from the source, pass the bucket to the next person, to the next person, to the next person. They would dump that on the fire. The empty bucket would make its way down another line back to the water. And basically that circular motion was how they fought fires back then. After a while, I'm certain not very long, passing 15, 20-pound buckets of water would wear you out very quickly. So you could see how ineffective early fires were, or firefighting. And from that, that's why in history, when you read about small fires pretty much burning down a city block, burning down the city and causing major damage, that's why they didn't really have a system to fight that. So the fire tubs were your first wave of high tech. So it still utilized the Bucket Brigade, except they were actually pouring the water into a holding tub. The machine had two lever arms, which they called brakes. And basically, one set of men on one side, one set on the other. With an up and down motion, they would create some sort of suction that would propel the water through a nozzle, and they would direct that into the fire. So that was a huge step where they could actually pinpoint and get water very closely to the fire. As you can imagine, if you've ever been camping, you know how hot it is near a roaring fire. Imagine an entire building on fire trying to throw a bucket of water at it. So that's where this technology started to take off. Rome was rumored to maybe have had one or two of them around 1830, 1840. I've yet to see any in Rome, or actually in this area. So there's something called fire marks. These are bronze plaques that were placed above your door or in some area near your door. I believe it was Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I was driving through a few months ago, and you can actually still see some of these on the houses. So when you paid insurance back then, fire insurance, the insurance company actually sponsored a local fire company. So theoretically, if your house was on fire and you did not have a plaque for that insurance company, they weren't really obligated to put that fire out, which caused a lot of problems. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie The Gangs of New York. You could see where the different fire companies were fighting, pushing around. That was a real thing back there. So if your house was protected by Aetna fire insurance, only Aetna could put your house out. And that's how it was. And there's multiple marks. Each company had a plaque, basically. I'm not really sure when that really fell off the wayside, probably 1870s, where most of these departments just realized it's for the better good to put fire out than play these games. But that's something, if you're in older towns, to look out for. Some of the artwork is pretty nice. So 1848 was the pivotal year for Rome when it came to fires. There were a lot of fires that year. And when anything involves the government, we always wait until something goes wrong, and then we decide we need to fix it. And that's what happened. The courthouse fire was pretty much what pushed it over the edge, where the citizens demanded that the city put some type of real fire department together, something to actually protect the citizens. Next slide. So back then, there were two types of firemen. The majority of them were known as exempt, and this is a badge from probably the 1870s from Rome, where you can see it says exempt. What that basically stated was you were a very important person in your community. Being a fireman, you were always on call. So you were exempt from jury duty and other civic obligations because being a fireman was more important. I love when I can find little things like that at flea markets or antique shows. To me, this is one of my favorite photos that I own. This is a ambrotype, so it's a photograph on glass. It shows two young Rome firemen dated 1854, 1855. You can see them all made up in their parade uniforms. The one's holding a speaking trumpet. So the trumpets would be used to shout out orders at the scene of a fire. So based on that fact, we could tell he's some type of officer, maybe a deputy chief of, I believe this was Mohawk Company 3, which was one of the 6 companies that Rome had at the time. Again, same thing. Membership was very important back then. There's a certificate there for one of Rome's early firemen. And they would carry that paperwork around with them. Like I said, a lot of that had to do with being exempt. And I guess a lot of us today would love to be exempt from some of this stuff, but I don't think that's an option anymore. The next slide, please. So here's a few photos out of the Society's collection. So these are all Rome firemen circa 1870. Not sure how good it shows up on the presentation here for you. So the top right shows one of the modern fangled firefighting machines, a actual engine. We didn't get the engines until after the fires in 1866. So here's again, I believe they were dated 1878 or something in that range. They're testing their hoses on Dominic Street, which would be towards the area of where St. Peter's Church is. And as you can see, if you look along the left side, you can see there's hundreds of people lined up because, well, let's face it, they didn't have the interweb or television or anything. So let's go look at the fire horses and watch them shoot water out of a hose.
That's pretty good entertainment, I'd say.
Here's a few shots from my collection. These are all different Rome firemen. Again, the lower right-hand corner is it's actually Civil War period. The one in the middle, Civil War period. The others are about 1880 period. When they weren't actually fighting fires, they did a lot of parading around. They loved to get dressed up. They loved to do civic events, balls, that type of stuff back then. Second to militia and military people, they had the fancy uniforms, all the ladies loved them. So to be a fireman was a pretty social thing back then. Rome hosted the volunteer fire conventions up until the 1950s. I guess something happened which I shouldn't talk about, so we no longer host the volunteer fire conventions in the city of Rome. The city of Rome actually became a paid department in 1892, but maintained volunteers up until the 1950s or 60s. As a researcher, no one's actually ever given me an explanation why they kept volunteers on while they had a paid department. A portion of it, Independent Hose Company 1 existed as a social group, but I guess they were actually active too. If needed, they would go help out at a fire. So the city of Rome, we put in some hydrants, water pipes, the waterworks that were established up on Ridge Mills there, added a great deal to the firefighting capabilities of the city. Up until that point, there were just a series of cisterns that were in the downtown area. Cisterns were basically just big wells and pools of water. And as always, they had the Mohawk River or the canal if needed to draft out of. And then likewise with that, they started to install what they called fire alarm boxes. You might have heard of these, you might have seen them, you may even have used one. If something happens, you run up, pull the lever, bells go off, and firemen show up. There's a very nice looking one. The picture that I show you there is in the park across from the fire department. It's restored. It's actually a police and fire box. (1891-92), the birth of the Rome Fire Department. And, Rome has always been noted for, it's if people have a problem, they're not afraid to say it. So there was a big fight at the time between the two chiefs. The volunteer chief actually thought he was going to be promoted to the paid chief, which didn't happen. So at that point, there were two independent chiefs serving, a volunteer chief and the paid department. So they erected 3 stations in Rome. Station 1, which was on Washington Street. And over the years, you could see where it went from horse-drawn to they took out basically the center and converted it over to a modern motorized area. The bottom photo shows it in wintertime. Those poor guys back then, when it actually snowed and you had 50,000 feet of snow to shovel off the roof.
And no snowblowers.
Although on a hot day, I guess I would envy them. So firemen's work not only included putting out a fire, it was shoveling, cooking, cleaning. taking care of the horses. So the station on Liberty Street, this would be a 1868 photo of it. The gentleman all the way on the left with the white shirt, the trumpet, is actually Jay Bates. That was the first chief of the Rome Fire Department. They fixed this building up, converted it, and then it became the photo you'll see in the next slide. So this is what the newly renovated version of station number 2 was. Station number 2, for whatever reason, was called 2, was always known as Central Fire Station. That was the main fire building. That's where the alarm systems went into. And just on cue, the fire alarm's actually going off in the distance here for Whitesboro. So this is a very interesting photo. This shows the transition from horses to the motorized department. This was 1915. So you can see when they were starting to phase out the horse equipment to the modernized cars. So during urban renewal, when they tore down the downtown to put up Fort Stanwix, Central was relocated just a little further up and now is on Black River Boulevard. So this would be your modern station number 2, which is the biggest station. So in the factory district, they had station number 3 on Lower George Street. It's actually the only one of the original 3 that still stands. So if you go down there today near the Polish home, you'll actually see this. It's been converted into a house, but that is the original station number 3. And as the city expanded in the 1960s, they opened up a satellite fire station on Laurel Street. And that's covers pretty much your outer district up there. So 1866, the city bought 2 used fire engines for a lot of money. One was by Cole Brothers. The other one was made by Silsby, a very famous brand of fire engine. This brought everything into a new light. Now we actually had modern fire equipment. But again, this was born out of 2 very disastrous fires that took place in 1866. This didn't alleviate the problem. There were still many fires following that, but this at least gave us a fighting chance to take care of fire when we had to. So this picture here, this was a hand tub. It was actually visiting from Utica. This was the Utica 1812 fire pumper. Not really sure why it was in Rome, perhaps a parade, but there it is. And those are the 2 steamers that they'd purchased, the Coles brother and a Silsby. Sadly for us, for the sake of history, during World War II, the metal was scrapped for the war effort, so we don't actually have the 2 that were in Rome. Each of them required a team of horses. And anybody who studies fire department lore, fire department history, this is what they used to call the Romantic era. This is the cinematography, I guess, of it. It's the romance of the horses charging towards the fire and the steam blowing away. And
Yeah.
To me, I mean, if your house is on fire, it's like, just get here, I don't care. But you'll see a lot of pictures where the horses are actually mixed in with the firemen because they were actually considered family. I mean, that's the level of care those horses were given. This is the first fire engine Rome purchased that was motorized. I love that all the kids are just on it playing. The kids have the fireman helmets on and everybody's having a good old time. Following those purchases, I mean, they just, as technology changed, as needs changed, as things wore out, they purchased new equipment. To me, the time era that I love the most for the fire department are the least photos that I've ever been able to follow. When we got into the 1930s, Rome went from red-colored fire equipment to white, and they had a very large painting of Fort Stanwix on the doors. Some of them had Oneida Indian motifs on the doors. Again, very few photos. I think there's a couple in the slides coming up, but that's when we changed over to the new design. And then in the 60s, they went back to the red color scheme. And as you can see in the lower right there, I mean, you probably barely make it out, but there's a painting of Fort Stanwix there. Again, one of those things I'd love to see in real life. So one of Rome's first fire engines, I've been trying to track it down. The picture above was purchased by someone in Floyd. So it may still be out in the area someplace. It was fully restored. Most of the early equipment was not made for the winter, as you can see, so they started closing the cabs in. That makes all the difference in the world. And then here's your modern fleet that's out there. Again, night and day from when things first began in the 1915 era. As buildings began to get taller and higher, well, you need ladders for that stuff. So they purchased the spring-loaded ladder. And then too, that became obsolete in the 1940s, which we had to start buying bigger equipment for that. And I think this photo is unique because, well, it shows something unique to, I guess, upstate New York. It snows. There's a lot of ice. So they actually had equipment that was converted to be used during the snow. As you can see, there's a sled on the cart. I do feel bad for the horses having to go through that stuff, though. But that's a quick tidbit. Most people probably don't know the ambulance services are actually handled by the police right up until probably the 1960s. It truly lived up to its title, Meat Wagons, if you've ever heard that title. They didn't really provide any service other than to pretty much pack you into the car and get you to the hospital. That was pretty much what an ambulance did back then. It wasn't until the 60s when the emergency medical technicians came about and started actually doing first aid on the scene. A few of the different chief's cars. Of course, we started with horse-drawn. And through the years, they got fancy and schnancy. The men. Like I said, they seem to always be dressed up. They were always just prim and proper, and they always looked professional. Of all the pictures I chose for the presentation, I like this group here because this shows them. Like the lower left, they're eating Chinese food. That's not something I really associate with Rome, New York around 1920. It's like we had a Chinese restaurant. And you can see the firemen sitting there near the heater, probably on a very cold night. The top left corner shows them at the alarm station. So if you pulled an alarm, that's where the bells would pretty much start to go off. But again, Chinese food in 1920 in Rome? Good Lord. Again, when firemen are on duty, a lot of people think, well, firemen just sit there all day and don't do anything. Firemen are on duty for 24 hours. They're required to actually clean, take care of the equipment, and do all that stuff. So, I mean, they are constantly on duty. Again, just a couple more shots of the men. So this is Chief Bauer, who's sort of in the middle. He was probably one of the longer standing chiefs. If you look at many photos, it's like, my God, he's in every one of them. Did he ever age? So he was there right up until the late 1930s. He started his career as a hose boy in 1877 in the Fort Stanwix Hose Company. And then when it became a paid department, he became a paid fireman and worked his way up to chief. So I think this was a 1917 shot of the Rome Fire Department. Here he is at his retirement, I believe around 1935. So this is the Rome Fire Department around 1935. They put out a special booklet during Rome's sesquicentennial in 1927. So this is the Rome Fire Department of 1927. That's the badge they were wearing at that time. Again, like I said, in the upper left, you can see Chief Bauer, who just was always there. So this is the Rome Fire Department, circa 1935, 36. You could see the motorized fleet was starting to get much larger. This is the Rome Fire Department, 1949. And you can see all of the white trucks lined up across the, oh, good Lord, is that Dominic Street? No, that's James Street.
Yeah.
Old City Hall is in the background there. Just confused as to what building they were standing on to take that picture. That's pretty high up. So this was the Rome Fire Department shoot around 1968. So these are the various companies, the various platoons on the equipment. It's a continuation of that fire shoot. So in 1870, the city of Rome was born. 1970, they had a 100th anniversary shindig. And one of the things back then that was popular throughout America had to do with men growing beards. The Brotherhood of the Brush, they called it. So this is a picture from 1870 showing some of the firemen adhering to the Brother of the Brush gimmick at the time, I guess if that's what you want to call it, or community civic pride. So your lower left-hand corner, the first fireman in uniform, that would be, in a later date, former Chief Ron Sweeney. I couldn't go around with a beard like that forever, that, especially in the summertime, no.
Yeah.
And not to rush through this, anyone dealing with Rome history, like I said, having had firsthand experience with Rome photography, there is an overabundance of Rome photos between the 1880 and 1920 period. Everything that was done was documented. You wouldn't believe it. However, and I've had talks with Art and the Historic Society. However, once you get to that period of 1930 to 1980, there's very, very little of anything that anybody's ever shared with the society. So I guess public service announcement, if you have photos from that time era, I'm sure they would love for you to bring them in so they can scan them.
Yes.
So most of our big modern fires, I can't even show you photos of because we don't have any. Nobody actually took pictures in that time frame. The early photos, yes, I'm going to show you some pictures of that. But again, so that's, I apologize. That's why a lot of the modern fires we won't be covering here because I just don't have the photos of them. So the little tidbit of Rome where we talked about Dominic Lynch, he stood here and said, this is Dominic and this is James. At that corner was called the American Corner. A lot of people have heard of that. It had nothing to do with the fort, had nothing to do with patriotism, had everything to do with actually a hotel being built there called the American Hotel. Its most illustrious guest was the Marquis de Lafayette. And unfortunately, it burned in 1846. On its site was built Stanwix Hall, the Stanwix Hall Hotel. So that's what actually graced part of the American Corner. I know when we used to give walking tours, everybody would say, oh no, that's because the flag was first flown at the... No, the American Corner was because of the American Hotel. Again, not to reiterate, but 1848 was the year it all went down, which led the community to take formal steps. It's the first time you actually see it appearing in the city code where a fire department's actually established. Now, I know I asked Miranda to see if there was a picture of a gentleman named Charles Carlos Cole. He would have been Rome's mad scientist. And Art and I were joking about it yesterday when we were talking. He would be Rome's, from the movie Back to the Future, he would be our Professor Brown, the crazy professor of Rome. He started out as a photographer in the 1850s. At some point became a staff member at Hamilton College, but he was also an accomplished aeronaut, a balloonist back in the 1860s and 70s. When you study history and stuff, you get mental pictures of what you think people look like. This is just a guy, a personal thing. I would like to see what he actually looks like, because you have a mental picture. You read about his exploits, and it's like, I would love to know what that guy looks like. Mm-hmm. So after that long introduction, there's also the story of the Wizard of Oz, the Baum family, the Mowry family. As you can see there, the one building is the Mowrys, which became Baum's Castorine. They always say that a young Frank Baum watched a balloon go up in Syracuse, which was actually piloted by Charles Cole, and he was the inspiration from the Wizard of Oz. Well, just a little bit before he went up in Syracuse, he tried that stunt in Rome. He lifted up on a balloon, which quickly got caught in the wind, slammed into the side of the First Presbyterian Church, burst into flames, and started a massive conflagration. It's a fire term. So little fires are little fires. When you start losing city blocks at a time, they're called conflagrations. So basically, this fire burned from the church all the way to the canal. They couldn't stop it, and it all started from his balloon. When he hit the church, he rolled out of the basket, fell to the ground. I believe he lost an arm in the process when all was said and done. So our little Wizard of Oz story and our little mad professor started one of the worst fires in 1866 Rome had seen. It caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. And when you search out his obituary, the obituary is not even 2 inches in column length. Doesn't tell anything about any of his real life achievements. So a few weeks later in July was the Elm Row fire. Someone was walking by the stables behind the Willett House, flicked a match, which pretty much started some of the hay and debris on fire. And before you know it, the entire downtown was on fire. This was so bad, they had to actually bring equipment in from Syracuse and Utica. They'd put fire equipment on the trains, and they started bringing it into Rome. They weren't able to handle it at the time because we didn't have the steam engines. All they had were the bucket brigades and the hand pumps. The only thing that stopped the fire eventually was a large row of elm trees on Elm Street. That's what actually stopped the fire. They were so thick and lush at the time that the fire just stopped there. It was a natural fire break. This fire actually, unfortunately, was the cause of Rome's only fireman to be killed in the line of duty. Philip Pickle ran into one of the alleyways to grab a couple lengths of hose when the building collapsed on him and killed him. Offhand, I forgot his age. I believe he was 20 or 21, and he was actually the sole surviving child who was taking care of his mother at his time. And the community rallied around that to help her. They put up a monument in the Rome cemetery for him, along with a special headstone. A very tragic story there. But again, the hose was so expensive, they couldn't leave that behind. They had to actually go get that. The next was about 1888, was the Merchant Iron Mill. There was a massive boiler and steam explosion, which leveled a few of the smaller buildings there, and it killed 2 or 3 people. So there's a vintage stereo view of that. So your modern Washington Street Opera House. So that would be the site of today's City Hall. After that had burned, that actually became the Rome Masonic Temple and all of that. So it was right next to the Arlington Hotel. That went up one night. It's the only photo I know of that shows the wreckage after the fire. That was one of Rome's more beautiful live performance venues at the time, which was quickly followed by the Sinks Opera House fire, which was the older of the two opera houses, built in the 1860s. Again, as you can see in the bottom corner, I think half of Rome turned out to watch it burn. It's like, hey, why don't you get involved there and help us with the fire? And unique about the actual fire photo there, where you see them shooting water into the building, or there's two gentlemen looking down into the fire from on top of the building next to it. Wiggins Block, 1907. So that's what it looked like before the fire. And the next few slides will show you what was going on during the fire. And this is what I mean by that time era, they'd actually documented stuff. So that would be the back. You could see they're actually pulling water out of the canal, trying to fight it from the back. Francis E. Bacon. So he was a, how do I want to put it? He would have been like your Walmart of the time. He sold everything there, from dry goods to stoves to whatever you needed for your home. That went up in January or February of 1908. I think that's the most documented fire in Rome. I have over 50 images, 50 different postcards of the fire, them fighting the fire, all the buildings that burned around it, the aftermath. And the funny thing is, every one of those postcards are stamped Francis E. Bacon. So I guess, how do you make money? Well, my place burned down, let me sell the postcards. True entrepreneurship. The City Hall fire of 1915. Again, that was quickly put out, but that little fire actually destroyed a lot of the early records of Rome, which doesn't help historians. So now I'm skipping over quite a few. I mean, one of the more talked about fires in 1938, I believe it was the Rome Free Academy fire. 1940 had the Larkin Block fire, Barney Levitt's. There was a whole host of fires. There were at least 30 fires in that range. But like I said, there's really no, other than the newspaper headlines, there's no pictures that we have of them. One that a lot of Romans probably remember, and I remember clearly, was the Price Chopper fire of 1988. I remember that it was Dad's day off and we were coming back from Oneida. It was the 4th of July. And we started to get close to Rome and you could see this huge plume of smoke. And I remember him saying, this isn't going to be good. As soon as we got home, there was the message on the machine, report to the fire station. So that was one of Rome's worst ones at that time. Woodstock, I was personally at that one. When you hand out candles to 250,000 angry people, things like that usually don't end well. I was actually last year perusing through photos of Woodstock and I came across the one in the lower right-hand corner. My dad's driving the truck there. I believe the other fireman's Paul Matwijak. And you can see the state troopers are riding on the back of it, trying to get into the fire. I was like, that's a unique find. I didn't even know they took that one. But I was there as it was burning, took a few photos. What would burn on a runway, I guess, right? So here's just a few random shots. Lower left is when the Rome Fire Department was called to Herkimer in 1910 for a series of floods. So you can see them posing with the engines, testing hoses, house fires. couple of the merchant mills there, their fires. You could see them drafting water out of the Erie Canal there at one point. I guess if I could go back in the time machine, I'd like to take a look at some of that stuff. House fires, the Canoffs fire. Canoffs would have been the plaza there that has Teddy's. Oh Lord, I can't think of what it's called right now. But that's would have been, event would have turned into Sears. So that was the 1950s. Rome Strip Steel fire was the other one. The Rome Synagogue fire, Davidson Chevrolet. I like the photo in the top center where it says rescue.
Mm-hmm.
The man wearing a white t-shirt was actually off duty at the time. He was a fireman. And he went and basically helped out his fellow comrades. That's one thing that's always struck me about firefighters. They're always there, willing and ready to help. And that was a great photo snapped at the right time. It just, you can see there's concern for what's going on, and you can see him actually holding the oxygen mask for his fellow firefighter. So I probably blew through that a little too quick, but.
No, I think that was good. I mean, I was setting the pace by clicking, so. But that was great. The photos are awesome. And it really makes for an awesome experience. Did you want to tell us a little bit about some of your stuff you have on your desk?
Well, I just had a collection of helmets out here. I mean, of course, every little piece of equipment has a purpose to it. Like this was my dad's fire helmet. This was back in the time era when they were made out of aluminum. So you look at a simple helmet like this, you say, what technology is involved in this? Well, you can see the curve on the back. This is actually for a reason. Back before they had the modern equipment and face masks, if you wore the helmet like this over your face, that little curve actually kept the heat out of your face. It also served a purpose. If embers were falling down, they would fall away from your jacket. They wouldn't go down your back. This little part of the helmet was always reinforced. This was used to break windows if you had to go in. So I mean, this, what you would think is just a headpiece, actually was a tool that was used quite a bit to break windows out, just personal safety. The earlier helmets, this one was from about 1910. So these are made out of leather. It's a very hardened, stiff leather. Same purpose back then. This design is what they call a high eagle. They always had this little eagle design on the helmets there. Some of them were lions. Some of them were a fireman with trumpets, snakes. But so this would be from that time era. And they called it high eagle because the little leather plate on the front was high. Same version. This one's a little later. This is about the 1920s. This was the start of the first aluminum ones. This was from one of the truck companies in Rome. As you can imagine, these things are not that common and not easy to find. Most of these were part of the Bill Carey collection. He was, dare I say, he was our competition. I was able to acquire a lot of that and add it to our collection. So at least I know that part of it's preserved. Down here I have one of the deputy chief uniforms, their hat. I guess we could do a whole 5-hour show just on that. I mean, I have badges, everything you can imagine under the sun. Yeah, hundreds of more photos.
You could curate a whole exhibit, probably.
And if we were able to do this in person, yes, I would have brought everything out for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah. But I do appreciate your plug about the photos, because going through our photo collection, there is definitely a gap. So if anyone's watching and has any leads, Pete or us at the Rome Historical Society would love to know. So I just want to say thank you to Pete for doing this presentation, and for everyone who's watching. and we hope that you really enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, you can put them underneath the video or email us directly, and we'd love to talk to you about it.
And I do have the book coming out, so as soon as we can get in there and finalize some stuff, I will have a Rome Fire Department book finally coming out. 20 years in the making, but yes, we'll get that out soon.
Wonderful. We're looking forward to that. Good.